right. Hello, everybody. This is Kyle Kirwan. I'm the co-founder and chief product officer here at Bigeye, and I'm joined today by Robert Long from Apptad. We're going to be talking about the AI audit. Robert is the chief product and technology officer at Apptad. And if you haven't heard of Apptad before, Apptad is a innovation and transformation consultancy. They specialize in data engineering and more recently in AI adoption. And Robert is pretty experienced. He's been in the enterprise data space since 1999. So he's got a thing or two to teach us today. Robert, thanks for joining me on the webinar.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
All right, let's see if we can pull up these slides that we have today to guide our conversation. But we're going to be talking about the AI audit. So Robert and I have both independently been speaking with chief information officers at a variety of enterprises. Obviously, AI adoption is the hot topic these days. If you're in enterprise data, this has probably been a big initiative, at least over the last year or so, certainly the last 6 months. And so Robert and I have been independently speaking with CIOs about AI readiness and what some of the challenges are that they might be facing. And so today we're going to be talking about the AI audit that we have helped put together. So first, we're going to start by talking about what AI readiness means anyway. Everybody's probably heard that word thrown around a few times, but what does that actually mean? So Robert and I are going to talk a bit about that. Then we'll speak a bit about the audit itself. We'll jump into the 5 key questions in the audit. And these are the questions that we think you should be asking if you're leading an AI readiness program at your company. And then we're going to go into Q&A at the end, and then we'll be sharing some next steps and resources as well. So Robert, you ready?
Absolutely.
All right. Let's start. AI readiness. So I think everybody's probably heard this phrase at this point. Gartner's talking about it. I've seen it all over LinkedIn. What does AI readiness mean to you and to the folks that you've been speaking to?
There's a few areas. One is, are our systems ready, right? Do we have the data in the stage that it should be? Do we have ways in which to secure and manage, understand where the activities are taking place? Do we have a way to go back and understand which decisions AI made and how we can trust it? And then there's the human side. Are our people ready for this? Do we have the right interfaces for them? Do they have the right support, the right training? And are we giving them the right guardrails and traceability so they feel confident doing something new?
And I think a lot of people that are dealing with this have probably been in the data space for a while, many of us, but AI is a new set of challenges, right? So like having your data ready for business intelligence or for even for machine learning. I was giving a talk the other day about the difference between sort of traditional software, machine learning based solutions, AI based solutions, having data in a state where you can use it for machine learning. Even that is a completely different challenge than what we're dealing with sort of AI readiness, especially if you're looking at deploying agents that can make decisions about what data they're going to use, as opposed to like machine learning. We know what the training data set is. We maybe know where the labels are stored. So obviously there's things that you need to do. But I think, as you're pointing out, like this is a new space, and the idea that you have an application that can make its own decisions about what data to use is probably that's a whole new box of challenges that people are going to have to worry about. I think you rightly touched on the people component. That's going to be mentioned as we get into the audit questions as well. I think that's actually going to be harder than a lot of the technical challenges. People stuff is always tricky, especially in big enterprises. Before we get into the audit questions, let's talk a bit about how we got here. So again, you've been talking to CIOs. I've been talking to CIOs, as well as some other roles. So VP of AI, that's a title that's been, some folks have moved into that role recently. I've spoken with a few of those, as well as some AI architects. So a couple of the folks that I've spoken with are more thinking about the technical architecture, maybe a little bit less focused on the people process there. They're more worried about like, how are we going to deploy this stuff and run it? So there's some questions in here about infrastructure, about observability. But for folks watching, we're going to go through these 5 key questions that Robert and I have identified together out of those conversations. And then at the end of the call, we're going to email you these 5 questions as well as some other resources as well. So obviously, feel free to take notes as we go through these and discuss them one at a time. But you'll be getting a copy of these at the end of the call also. So you can just sit back and watch, and we'll be sending you a copy of these. You can modify them, obviously, and use them within your own organization. All right. So with that, let's jump into the first one. So the first question that we ran into is, can you trace the decisions that are getting made with your AI applications that go back to the data that inform them? Do you want to, what does this mean to you, Robert? Like if you're using AI and you need to understand like what data it's running off of, why?
Yeah, I think this goes back to some conversations you and I have been having where there's what happens inside of each system, sort of on each island in your enterprise. And so there's modernization challenges there as you weave AI and as the vendors come in with their AI features. But what gets really interesting and where I love some of the perspectives your team brings is that what do we do across the entire enterprise so that we can get a sense of what's happening across the board? So we can get a consistent view of it, because you're seeing all of these different approaches and frameworks from all of the vendors. And one of the challenges is, how do I interpret all of that data in a consistent way? Because then you have different skilled sets in different teams. And some of the vendors, they're using user-first design. So they're presenting it to the business user. Some of them are system or engineering focused. So they're presenting the data more in like a deep dashboard or some reports. But the way that they're presented is not consistent. So I think coming up with a way to look across the systems and have some metrics that let you then drill into the islands, right? But you need that 10,000 foot view. And I think that's something that's missing in a lot of these approaches.
I think you touched on a point there that's also been a key part of the conversations I've been having, which have been, of the enterprises that I've spoken with that are deploying AI in some form, a lot of them are currently building it themselves. So they're using Gemini or they're using Bedrock. They're using a foundation model that's provided, obviously one of the big ones, but they're building their own internal solution. They're giving it usually a branded name. They're building a web interface for it. They're rolling it out to their users, and so it'll often be like the company's name, GPT. And that's currently, we're seeing a lot of that, or at least a lot of the CIOs that I've spoken with, it's completely bespoke, homegrown solutions. But I think you mentioned vendors bringing things in. You're going to have the marketing team bringing in a platform. You're going to have customer success bringing in a platform. Somebody's going to go buy Agentforce from Salesforce. Somebody might bring in Glean because they want to be able to search, knowledge stuff about the way the enterprise works, documentation, Google Drive, Box, things like that. So we're moving, I think, towards a world where you're going to have some completely bespoke enterprise agents or chat-based AI interfaces. Those are going to be accessing your data. Your enterprise data, so unstructured and structured data. And then you're also going to have a bunch of these vendor-based platforms. Glean's going to be accessing data. Agentforce is going to be accessing data, maybe largely in Salesforce, but possibly outside. You've got Genie, AI BI Genie from Databricks. You might be building things on top of Cortex from Snowflake. So you're going to end up with this mix, I think, of like vendor-based AI applications and then completely bespoke ones that have been built internally. And I think to your point, the question is, how are you going to be able to see across the entire thing, the whole landscape, and see what they're all doing and who's interacting with them and where the data is coming from?
And I think you're touching on something else. Back in 2016, which seems like forever ago, like a lifetime now, when we were looking at the rate of change in the enterprise, how fast are new technologies being adopted? And I don't think we've ever stood in the enterprise in the situation we're in today, where there are so many new solutions, new approaches, new architectures being attempted at the same time. We're seeing enormous changes where businesses are moving away from teams of consultants to solve certain problems to adopting a new technology and knowing that they're on an experimentation course and a maturation curve. So we're seeing these things mature in place more rapidly than ever before. But that brings traceability and observability even more to the forefront, Because if you don't have some idea of lineage of how things happened, why they happened, then the chance to generate these spaghetti code messes, right? Nobody wants to own version one. So I think a lot of the teams have been building their own solutions, but the vendors have been rapidly evolving so quickly that they're going to come in, and we're a year to 2 years away from CIOs stepping back and saying, this is my internal cost, this is my cost to bring in a new platform. So now with the experience we have internally, if I give them some more standardized tools, how quickly can they go? What else can they do? And I think that tool adoption is something we've talked to a lot of customers about, because even today they're worried about the runaway cloud cost, they're worried about the runaway compute cost. And then let's face it, our best and brightest have gravitated towards these problems, and they're not inexpensive either. So, we know we're in an investment stage and the businesses have reformed around that, but they're also looking for when is steady state? When are we ready to run? And that's part of what we're talking about today. And part of that being ready to run is, can you see which changes took place across your enterprise and where the changes came from? So if you get into the data fabric or you get into your data lake or data warehouse, then you need to know, why did these changes wind up in this data? Why is this golden record golden? And what is my survival? What is my lineage? What is my traceability back? And then what's happening in those systems? Because those systems are jockeying for position now, where they're building data quality into them and then AI on top of it. So data quality isn't solved. A lot of people thought it was solved, but now it's a moving target again.
Yeah, I think your point about sort of having a steady foundation underneath while things are changing rapidly on top, that I think that resonates with what I'm hearing from a lot of folks, which is like, we need to shore up our data management to make sure that the data management foundations are in place, so that everything that's going on with AI on top, that you're working on a solid foundation. Because if you're going and trying to build something that already has the potential for hallucination, it has the potential to access the wrong data set, we're in sort of that early trust building phase as people are rolling these out. So being able to tie back, here's the agent that the user was speaking to, here are the data sets that it accessed, I can see where those data sets come from, I can trace them all the way back to their origins. Having that foundation to be able to do that eliminates a lot of the potential trust risks that are going to come from building the actual AI applications that are effectively at the end of the data pipeline. So
yeah, and I'm not going to fall down the rabbit hole, but the security, right? I mean, the AIs have to act within the security remit of each user. You can't just plug in the AI as its own layer. And people are starting to realize that as well. The AI cannot follow the appliance model.
That's actually a great segue into our second question. Do you understand how and where you have sensitive data flowing into the model? So obviously this is going to come up organically anyway. But if you have, to your point, if you have business users, they're talking to an agent, if that agent has access to hit Cortex Analyst in Snowflake, for example, you really need to understand what is the permissions model for your user, for the agent, for the access that the agent has. What access does your Cortex Analyst have? And then separate from the permission model, a thing that I heard a lot was, we need to have basically auditability of what was accessed. So one thing is the permissions model itself, but then the other question that I think an executive would need to be able to answer when they're deploying an AI strategy is, do we have an audit log of what data was accessed by each workflow that the agent ran? What was the user that issued the prompt?
And these are things that have been questions for years, right? The auditability has been a question, but I think the timeliness of this has become much more imperative. Before it was, things change slowly, so if we find an error, then we just want to go back and we're looking for bad actors or we're looking for fraud. Now, you're talking about changing businesses' operating models. You're talking about letting AI step into business processes that have been coded into workflow systems for 10 years, but people have sort of known organically what they could and couldn't do, the boundaries. And the next thing that's happening is, we haven't talked about the generational shift that's going on as well, right? You have a lot of the businesses have gotten lean through all these changes. So they have a lot of very senior people who have a lot of the business context stored organically. They know their processes, they know their boundaries. But when you let this next generation that doesn't question the system, they trust the system because they've grown up. They're AI natives. They've had Siri and Google in their pockets for their formative years, and now they're coming into the workforce. So they expect the system to have the right answer and for them to be able to move much quicker, whereas previous generations would look at that answer and compare it to maybe 2 or 3 other answers contextually. So the way people are going to use and trust the systems is changing radically. And so the way decisions are made on the ground at the lowest levels is changing because the people coming into those roles have a more executive function mentally because they've been delegating to systems already. They've not had to keep all the knowledge in their brain. They've been able to just solve each problem. So they're just-in-time learners. They're rapid decision makers. They don't get anxiety around decision making the same way previous generation did. But that means the systems have to be more accurate, have to be more ready, and the veracity of the answers has to be much higher. So the sensitivity isn't just security-wise. It's how sensitive is the data to the process and the decisions on the ground at a daily basis. Can I give this discount? Can I accept this return from this customer, et cetera?
And all those interactions, they're focused on getting the task done, or like you said, making the decision quickly, and they expect that the tool has the appropriate safeguards so that sensitive data is not going to get exposed unless it is allowed to be exposed for that particular use case, right?
Yeah, and the word sensitive now doesn't just include confidentiality levels. It includes what the impact of that data point is on the decision at hand, because it's not going to be considered with 2 or 3 other data points. This is someone who's new to your business. They expect the system to present them with accurate and complete information. So they're going to make a decision on what your system shows them right then. They're not going to go ask 3 other people. They're just going to make this customer happy and move to the next one. They're those rapid fire problem solvers. So the sensitivity isn't simply security. It's how does that data allow a decision to be made up and down the stack in your business?
So if we were to phrase this, if there's a CIO watching and they're gonna include this as one of the questions in sort of their internal AI readiness audit, it sounds like the question that they need to be asking, the basic one is, do we know where the sensitive data in the traditional sense comes from? So that might be PII, it might be PCI related stuff, it might be PHI related data, but it could also include company IP. Let's say that you're a food and beverage industry player, and you may have IP that is related to formulas or recipes or things like that. That's not sensitive in the regulated sense, but it is sensitive in terms of IP and protecting the company's longevity. Then beyond that, I think the second question, as you brought up, is like the data that's relevant to the task, and is it the data that's necessary for that person that's interacting with the AI application to get the task done?
Yeah, a perfect example is favored customer treatment, right? So our customer has a certain spending level, right? I go into the local building supply store, the orange one, right? And when I swipe my card, they know what I've spent in the last year. So they know if I'm eligible for certain discounts or whether or not I get certain, tool returns or whatever. So, but the person at the counter may not recognize me because it's a chain, right? It's a large store. Or I might go to the next one down the street, the same store, to get, more paint or something that I've already bought all of it from the close one. So how are you ensuring that customer's experience matches your brand promise? And part of that may be this clerk does not have access to my transaction history. They also don't have access to my yearly aggregate spend for the last 3 years. But the AI should tell them whether or not to accept a return based on things that it can ask and queries it can make that don't expose those data points. So there's aggregate data versus component data and what's needed for the business operation as we continue to grow and scale our businesses with an incoming workforce so that our brand promises are met. And so when we talk about sensitivity of data, I need to make a decision on sensitive data, but I need it That's a medical term. I need the data scrubbed down to an aggregate that I can make a decision on, even though I don't have access to the component data. And so AI is going to have these new data access patterns that our systems aren't doing today. And so I think when you have this end-to-end observability, when you can look across environments and see where that data comes from, so that this action took place on an API query here to here, and here's how fresh the data was when the API query took place. That's why this clerk made a decision. They did the best they could with the data we gave them. We need to fix the data, not fix the person.
So if I can put this in practical terms, in terms of like looking for a solution, first step is sensitive data classified? Is it labeled and tagged? Do you have that in your systems? And then secondarily, do you understand how it's being aggregated and where it's ending up being used in workflows by AI? And then ultimately tying that out to the business users who are getting those results.
Yeah, 10 years ago when we were doing machine learning models, right? Everybody was, because we had Hadoop clusters. We were doing ML and AI in behind the scenes. Now it's making its way to the front of our business, to all of our users. 10 years ago, everybody wanted data quality because the machine learning teams, they understood the metadata and they were getting the right information into models to train to find outcomes. Today, that metadata has to flow because there's the technical metadata that we look at from an observability, and then there's the metadata that goes out to the edge so that someone knows how to use it in a decision that they're making. Because these people are new to enterprise systems. So metadata is the next challenge for AI, and there's sensitivity to metadata as well, just like you were discussing in your previous statement.
So this rolls into our next question, I think, fairly naturally, which is, are your systems and is your team ready for AI usage patterns? And I think you brought up an interesting point, which is the difference between the sort of incoming next generation of the workforce for whom these tools are going to be native. It would be like somebody using, web-based tools today. That's just the environment that we grew up in. That's from day one of your career, you might have been using email and Slack and things like that, and that's just very familiar and not something that you actively think about. That's the era that we're going to be entering into with a new generation of folks coming into the workforce with AI-based tools. But there's also a huge number of people who are mid-career or advanced stage in their career right now for whom this is going to be a change. And I think the question that I heard from some of the CIOs that I spoke with was on the people and process side, which is how ready is my team and how do I assess that?
And now I've been really pleasantly surprised. I was speaking at a manufacturing conference recently, and some of the later stage career people really caught me off guard because they've adapted to the the natural language voice user interfaces, because they've been using their phone assistants. They've been doing this in their daily life because they don't want to interact with all the mobile apps. So as natural language is making its way into the enterprise, they're actually really excited. Slack was hard for them. They're like, what's an emoji? I didn't know that's what that one meant, right? So for them, they were adapting to something that was culturally different. Now they grew up watching Star Trek, right? They're like, computer, do this. So I think it's interesting because usability is coming closer to the user. But what that means is that now the computer has to determine semantic intent. It has to match concepts to data points and systems so that we can actually know in the agentic space, which agent should I invoke and what context do I pass it? Because now this person, they're basically asking a digital army to go do things for them on their behalf. And then they're building a context that when they retire in 3 to 4 years, they're looking at it saying, I don't know how to hand off what I'm doing to the next generation. And they realize how core they are to the operations of those businesses because they have been the backbone for so long. But what that means is that AI is going to be collecting workarounds in their systems. It's going to be collecting metadata that's in these people's mind. It's going to be collecting usage patterns that aren't written down anywhere. Are we ready as technology providers, to capture what AI is getting and persist it somewhere so that as the AI models advance, as the vendors change, right? What if your company goes from Amazon to Google or Google to Microsoft or starts using Anthropic instead of OpenAI? With these vendor changes, are we capturing as technologists enough of this output intentionally and then connecting the dots across the environments between agents, between systems, and between data sources so that we can say, okay, this is the impact of that change? Because people are also concerned about vendor lock-in and token cost and everything else. So there are patterns that are emerging rapidly.
And so I think that's interesting on the human side, is that we may actually have an easy glide path for folks, like you said, who are benefiting from a natural language interface or from a chat interface. We have folks who are coming into the workforce for whom these are native tools in the first place. So that's a bit on the people side, and maybe you can assess within your own workforce, like, how do people feel? Like, do they feel like they are ready for adoption of AI tools in their workflow? Do they feel hesitancy? Do they feel questions about like trust? Then there's also the infrastructure side. So we put teams in parentheses here. That's the people part. There's also the systems part, or the infrastructure end. What have you been hearing in terms of like level of concern around, for example, is my warehouse going to get slammed? Is my data lakehouse going to get slammed? Do I have the appropriate star schema in place? Do I have gold tables that are ready for use by the agents? So what have you been hearing in your conversations in terms of like how ready people feel from an infrastructure standpoint?
And we've been, working on some solutions for this as well. You and I had discussed. I mean, I think part of the challenges are, and we'll stick to the challenges. People know they have legacy systems that have the data and that they trust the algorithms they've put in place over the years. They trust their matching and linking. They trust their survivorship. They trust their data engineering infrastructure. But they realize that those legacy systems were not developed or engineered for the scale of unmitigated API access that these AI agents can unleash. Because the AI agents aren't going to care if they think that's where the right data is. They're just going to go and ask that system. So what are we doing to help them not just make sure the data is the right quality, but that it's in the right place where it can be accessed at the right rates with the right responsiveness, right? Because if the AI stalls out, then the people, if they've started to trust the AI, then now they're a little helpless. It's like your GPS glitching on the highway. You might miss an exit, right? So we don't want people missing exits in the business. And, this customer walks away, or we get an order wrong, or somebody, just gets flustered. So when we think about these new patterns and readiness, I think it's not just how do we process the data, but there's a whole question around how do we know which data got used for which operation, that it was presented in such a way that it was ready and able to be used, and that we were able to record what happened so that we can continue to tune behavior. Because that last part's very important. Everybody's observability questions are going back to, okay, we're going to trust AI a little bit. We're going to see what it does. We're going to measure, and then we're going to iterate. And then we're going to trust, measure, and iterate, trust, measure, and iterate. And so this loop, this cycle, this virtuous cycle that's being developed is great. But if you don't have the observability, then it breaks down the speed at which you can get your business accelerated. Because your best people that know everything, the faster you can give them the right tools, the more competitive you can be in the marketplace. The longer you take to adopt these tools, then you're not going to benefit from that cost structure. You're not going to benefit from that speed or that scale of reach. Because now if your best marketer can reach 10 times the same number of people in your core buying demographic, and your competitor is still paying, external agencies and AdWords and everything else, and they can't get the same reach to their same people, or they have to scale up the number of people where you can just take your best person and turn them loose for the same results. Your ability to adopt AI and run that test, validate, iterate cycle, the faster you can run those cycles, the more reps you can get, the faster you can go. And I think people are really concerned about their ability to trust the output, their ability to see it in a way, especially the less technical. So I don't think AI has made the technical to non-technical gap any better. In fact, I think it's making it scarier in some ways because the new ways of storing and managing data, vector databases, neural nets, things like that, these are structures that people that are in decision-making positions who have been away from the tech for years, right? They've been in solving other problems. There's this cognitive dissonance. There's these ideas that they can't rationalize, and there's the mathematics and the models and some of the decision-making criteria. It's harder for them to understand. So being able to point and say, this is what happened, this is why, what did you want to happen? Okay, let's make this change and try again. That's the level they have to operate at. Can we surface the findings in that language at that level? And I think that's an AI usage pattern that's it's not just dashboards anymore.
I think we did have the benefit, if I was explaining Snowflake maybe to an executive who came from a different field and wasn't really familiar with it, or pick your data source. I just grabbed Snowflake at random, but it's pretty easy to say, think about a spreadsheet, but just imagine like a lot of them. And that, it gets the basic idea across pretty clearly, and everybody's seen a spreadsheet. But yeah, you want to go do that, explaining a vector database, it gets trickier a lot faster. So yeah, I think to your point, we have the potential for things to get more confusing or seem more like, sort of magic, black box magic, and it's a little bit less approachable at times. You also mentioned, I think you touched on data quality again. So that's our question number 4 that we aligned on, which was, when you're running these things, and again, they may have access, some of them may be locked down. They may only be able to access gold level tables, or they may only be able to access like a very specific schema. And that's probably a wise design pattern, is to say, great, for this particular agent or for this particular use of AI, it really only needs access to the following areas. In other cases, let's say, for example, we have somebody on data science. You may want to give them pretty wide access to stuff so that they can go and find data sets that they need to work with. In cases like that, you're going to need to be able to assess the quality of the data on a much larger scale than perhaps you have needed to in the past. You mentioned earlier, you were talking about analytics briefly. I think when you have an analytics dashboard and you can see the lineage from the analytics dashboard back to the data, you know exactly what data that dashboard is running on. It doesn't really change unless somebody goes and modifies the dashboard. It's not dynamic. So the data quality problem, is not simple, but it's at least bounded. It's a bounded problem. You know what data sets you need to monitor quality for to assess that particular dashboard. And that's changed. So now when you're working with an agent, the input data might be dynamic now because it can make decisions, and that's kind of changed things.
I think something else you and I discussed is that, MDMs tended to have, the master data management platforms, they tend to have data quality in them. There are enterprise data quality tools that apply consistent data quality, at least metrics and reporting, and then they reach into the other systems or data streams and fix it along the way. That borders on data engineering. And then you get into the data warehouse data lakes, where you do things in mass by batches and jobs, and you arrive at these larger sets of silver, the medallion architecture is bronze, silver, gold, platinum, diamond, whatever as people implement. The challenge now with AI, because AI, the whole point with agents is you give them tools. The tools are by nature different systems. How do I compare data quality consistently across my enterprise, even if it's not as fine-grained? But how do I know what the average data quality is that's feeding these agents? And can I put that in a place that a business user can agree to it, and we can tell an agent how to make a decision about which data source to use based on quality versus speed? And if we can't bring a consistent view to that, which is something I think you guys have been putting a lot of work into, I think if you don't have that, then you wind up with this team that's trying to make apples to oranges comparisons, but there's not a baseline. And then the problem is when you get 2 or 3 levels up to the people that own the processes, the data stewards are fine. They're going to get it. They're used to this world and this language. The process owners, the business managers who are responsible for these outcomes that are tied to revenue, right? They don't get paid if the business doesn't perform. They don't speak that language, right? So when we're talking to them and they're the ones saying, okay, the agent's going to make a decision just like a person would, how do we govern that decision? I need something I can understand. And that's where this single pane of glass has got to give us some consistent baselines across enterprise architectures, because you still have the AS400s out there. The throughput of mainframes, nobody's touching them with cloud systems still. That's why they're still there. So they can be old and clunky, but the raw amount of data that they process, still phenomenal. And then you have the large cloud systems, and you have your Salesforce and your CRMs and your HubSpots and Zohos. And then you have your customer behavior systems and your e-commerce. These systems all speak differently. What does data quality look like across the board? And that's because there's the human approval and the agentic action. And if we can't give them a baseline, this is the short version, right? The TLDR. If your humans and AI agents can't use the same baseline for data quality, then you're not going to be able to help people reliably assess and maintain that quality at scale.
I found that anthropomorphizing the agent a little bit, obviously is not, it's not technically accurate, but it's a useful mental model for asking these types of questions about quality, where if you essentially say, okay, if somebody on the marketing team, going back to your example that you gave about how much reach can you achieve with what budget, if somebody on the marketing team wants to go and look at some information that they could analyze that might help them assess performance of certain campaigns, or where have we found effective channels and can we divert more budget into those channels or something like that. If they're going to go and do that analysis, you want to make sure that anything that they might pull into that analysis is high quality, because otherwise you're going to end up with bad information about which channels are performing well. Now they start diverting budget into the wrong places. Now you've actually reduced the efficiency of your marketing engine. So it's one level of problem to deal with when you have human operators who are going out and querying data. And then it's on a completely different level when you have an agent that could be working basically around the clock. It can move at significantly faster pace. Somebody might go and fire off a prompt and ask for an analysis across channels, and the agent's going to go out and do it. And then they're going to get a very confident sounding answer back in the analysis, the marketer. And so if you cannot assure quality across all the data that the agent might access as part of that workflow, then you potentially have a problem. Because my guess is that marketer, they're not going to go and fact check every single input that went into the analysis, at least the vast majority of the time. I assume people aren't going to be able to do that.
And I think you touched on two things there that are very important. One, shout out to one of my team members, Andrew. He coined this phrase, confident incompetence. And it tokenized something that I've been watching all my career, right? People that are very sure of their answer, they are very wrong. But the problem is that's a boundary, right? Because they were trusted to go get the information. The next layer is making a decision on it. So we have to be able to manage the confident incompetence in AI, the quality of the output, the veracity of the output, how much can we trust it? But I think the advantage and the opportunity a business has in that is that you can fix it, and then it's fixed for everyone, because this agent can be made available to any number of people. So before, where you had to embed a number of resources because people scale linearly, so then X number of people mean there's X number of other people all the way down the stack. So now your data team, are all these people acting consistently? Or does the marketing have their data person, right, depending on how the businesses are segregated? Or if it's some of these large co-ops. I've had a number of customers, global businesses that grew through merger and acquisition. And what they did is they came up with some core services, but inside of each business unit, they still operate with a certain degree of autonomy, so they have their own analysts there. But if I could introduce an agent that brought consistency, and consistency is different than governance. What we've tried has been heavy-handed for 20 years, and it's always expensive and never quite done well, which is I'm going to go force everybody to do it the same way. But what we rely on are these architects in the middle, these people that translate and are able to understand you're using a term, they're using a term, these terms have different contexts. How do we get you to a common verbiage? And that's where agents can really shine, because they can track that metadata and know that in each context, there are different connotations. So the semantics change, even though the syntax stays the same. The agents give us a chance to bring consistency without forcing the controls. And this is a new game altogether. But again, if we can't understand the data quality across all of those systems, then now how do we give that agent a way to bring that consistency? So again, we get back to this baseline across all systems where we can set some scores and get everybody onto that common standard. It becomes a Rosetta Stone of your data quality.
I was thinking about like the old Tower of Babylon tale,
Yeah.
and being able to finally like merge the languages, but doing it with KPI definitions and semantic definitions. And I remember back when I worked at Uber, this team would have a definition of a trip. That team had a different definition of a trip. They were both right, different definitions because different meanings.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. This presents an opportunity to sort of auto translate across those different contexts.
But it starts with the baseline because we translate to the baseline. Google Translate, and the way it works is, and this surprised them, is the early days of machine learning. When they started applying AI to translation, the system surprised them because it quit doing point to point and it generated a base language that was not any human language, but it was a semantic middle ground. And it brought everything to that baseline and then brought it back out. Because for each language, it could manage one translation token comparator set, all the tuples of all the different terms and how they're used, right? But we have to give that same Rosetta Stone to the business so that, because now it's not just decisions in the C-suite, we're passing all of that down all the way through the business because we have these agents doing it, looking at multiple data sources.
Well, I think this takes us to our final question, which I think is a little bit of a gotcha. I think if anybody hasn't already asked this question when they're thinking about AI readiness, this one's important. You shouldn't skip it. So this one came up, I think every single CIO I spoke with, this was top of mind for them, which is, has the AI initiative been tied to a measurable outcome? Because at the moment, we're in this sort of Wild West stage where a lot of people have been given budget and a lot of autonomy to go out and acquire different tools and form a tiger team and go out and build an application and get it into production with a removal of red tape that is rarely seen. But the flip side of that is at the end of that entire process, they're going to have to be able to show receipts and say, cool, this is the budget that we spent. We went out and we tried these 50 different things. Here are the 5 that actually make sense, and we should continue to invest in these 5. And going forward, we're going to put these into production, and this is what we learned. And this is, there needs to be an outcome from the last 6 to 18 to 24 months of experimentation period that we've been going through. And the C-suite's going to expect to see quantified results, which is like, great, we went off, we did all this crazy experimentation. What did we learn, and where are we actually going to apply this in the business? One CIO I spoke with, for example, was applying AI to their collections process. So they were helping to automate collections outreach emails. And so they had an agent that they had developed. This was the enterprise platform team that was developing this for the line of business that deals with collections. And what it would do is it would go and look up information about overdue accounts. It would draft a personalized email to that customer. And then there's a human in the loop to review it. And then it gets fired off. And so for them, the output metrics there were how many collections can each individual person who's responsible for issuing the collections, how many are they able to send out? How much are they actually able to recoup for the business? And they needed to see a measurable uptick in efficiency from each of those individuals on the collections team. And that was a very clearly defined metric for them. And I think that's like a great example of being able to answer question 5 here.
I think the agentic nature, and as agents and the frameworks to activate them become more robust and implemented, they become more common. And again, I don't think there's going to be a single one. I think there will be some that are really good, and then they'll talk to each other. 2023 was shock. 2024 was how do we align to experiment? 2025, I think, has been a year of experimentation. 2026, I think, is when the business is going to start saying, okay, now how are these things maturing? How do we make money off of these investments, right? We've spent this money. The analysts told us we had to find our way. We know it's the Wild West. Now the rubber is going to start hitting the road in 2026, and people have to start answering to this, right? So I think agents get plugged in departmentally, and then the enterprise starts connecting the dots. But what we've been able to insulate from traditionally is departmental solutions stayed in the department. Today, departmental implementations are going to affect the enterprise because all the other agents are going to be querying all the other data sources. And so I don't think you can isolate things as much as you could in the past as easily, especially if you're going to start really turning AI on. So, having this goes back to some of the data fabric, data mesh days as Gartner and Forrester were shooting that out. But I think at the end of the day, you have to have agreed on a baseline observability across all the systems. I think you need a baseline semantic layer, and then you need an approach to security and governance. I don't know that that's a single system. I think it's a governed set of measures and approaches, and then you watch it through your observability platform, and you enforce it in your semantic layer. But I think that you're going to have to start isolating your point systems from this traffic so that you can measure and tune the responses. And I think that's what we're going to see really emerge in the second half here of 2025 and early in 2026. It's going to be all about observability and semantic layers.
As folks put things into production like this, as you mentioned, like, let's say we have 5 different lines of business, they each start deploying, agentic AI. Let's say we end up with like kind of networking or agent to agent interaction between them. Where do you think the measurement of sort of the business results should be happening? Like, is that something that you think we can actually get out of the agents themselves, or is that something that needs to be a separate process that's outside of the actual like AI infrastructure?
I think that's going to vary based on the business management style, and I'll turn that question back to you as well. But if you have somebody that's doing, if they've implemented, say, the EOS, OKR, like Andy Grove's framework, top to bottom, then you're going to have reporting in both directions, right? You're going to have, okay, these were our objectives, and at every level of the business, here were the objectives and the key results. And you're going to, if your business management structure is well sorted, then I think you're going to report at each layer. If your business has if you've gone through some turmoil because you're in one of the heavily affected industries, or you're really shifting from people to systems, then I think you're going to do more enterprise-wide reporting. If you're in a very large, mature business, think about pharma, where they have a high degree of competence, and they've been using machine learning for a long time. There'll probably be more point reporting, and the top is going to look to them for the answers, and then they'll generate their reporting later. So I think it'll be different in different verticals. What are your thoughts?
Well, my viewpoint on this maybe comes from my background, which earlier in my career was in A/B testing. So I helped design A/B testing platforms, and so my viewpoint on this comes from that, which is to say, if I was in charge of an AI initiative, going back to my collections example, how are you going to show what the uplift was in the efficiency of that team once you added in this agent that assists with the collections emails? So if you just flip the thing on and it starts running, you can kind of measure a before and after, and you can say, all right, before we deployed this agent that assists with the collections email drafts, we were doing, per person on the team, we were sending out 10 collection notices a day, just making numbers up. And then in the 90 days after deploying the agent, it went up to 25 a day. Great. So we had an uplift of, 2.5x. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, which I think would be, hold water better, if you were going to go and show these actual results to leadership, would be to basically turn the thing on for a subset of the team and not for the other part, and run that way for a while, and essentially say, we're not going to penalize anybody on the, the control group, the folks who don't get access to the agent. We're not going to like dock their performance review or anything. The goal will be a period where we're doing a comparison, and we're going to say, for members of the team who do have access to this agentic system, how many notices are they able to send out during the trial period of 3 months or whatever it is, and then what is the same number for the control folks, or the folks who are doing it the existing way without access to the agent. And that gives you a very clear apples to apples comparison that says, cool, over the same 90-day period with the same customer base and the same business conditions, person who did not have access to the agent that we developed was sending out 10, and the folks who did have access to it were sending out 25. So that's kind of where my head goes on this. But I would encourage folks to look at like what is practical within their organization. Can you do that? If not, maybe just doing a before and after is fine. Either way, though, you need to know what the metrics are up front. I think one major thing that you could do that would not be great would be just to go put the agent out there and then do the metric collection after the fact. I would definitely have an idea up front of what metrics you're trying to move for the business.
Yeah, you can't. You can measure anything, but if you don't compare it, if you don't set a baseline, then your measurement's questionable at best. I think part of this gets back to exactly what we were discussing, right? What is the size and shape of your business? And if you do have a well-sorted business with good metrics at each level, then you have established metrics. This is very easy, right? And then you can segregate your team even internally because you know what your performance levels are within the team, and you can make sure that you split it so that you have good and A and B players using the tool and not, so that you don't introduce bias into the testing and the results. For the smaller businesses or the ones who are trying to grow through AI, because I think this opens up so many opportunities for smaller rapid fire businesses now. Look at supply chain operations, logistics operations, where they have people gatekeeping data between systems where you're checking inventory in 3 different levels. Well, now an agent can streamline that whole process, and you can change your costing models and you can change your response times. So I think, some of these, it depends on what your transformation is and how big your business is so that you actually have enough people and enough metrics collected so far to do really good A/B testing. But you should take a measured approach regardless. Otherwise, you're taking a chance on not getting a good ROI. And that's what, at the end of the day, I don't want any customers that don't get a good ROI because they're not going to be a good reference.
All right. I think that takes us, we're getting pretty close on time here. Fortunately, we did get through our 5 questions that we recommend on the AI readiness audit. If you would like to connect with us, there's a couple of QR codes here for you. So the first on the left, this is if you'd like to get in touch with us here at Bigeye and learn more about our enterprise data observability platform. We're happy to do a demo, tell you more about the platform and how we're helping support AI initiatives with end-to-end data lineage and observability. And with the code on the right, you can connect with the folks at Apptad, including Robert and his team. And you can learn more about their transformation services that includes both data engineering in the traditional sense as well as modern AI initiatives.
Kyle, thank you for the partnership between our businesses. We're really enjoying that and our customers are benefiting. And thanks for the conversation today.
Robert, thanks for joining me as well.